Welcome back, my orbitally dispersed data administrators. I'm your copper-plated communications coordinator, simultaneously reflecting radio waves across infinite realities. You're tuned into the Multiverse Employee Handbook, the only podcast that treats your file storage solutions like an attempt to accessorize the entire planet. Speaking of questionable storage solutions, I'm delighted to report that executives at Quantum Improbability Solutions have announced their revolutionary orbital filing initiative. After conducting a comprehensive audit of our office space, they discovered we have approximately 42,000 filing cabinets that haven't been opened since the invention of email, creating what the facilities department diplomatically calls a navigational hazard. The solution? Launch all of them into perfect orbital formation, creating the world's first truly cloud archival storage system. The automated response system has calculated a 142% chance this will result in the most expensive office furniture move in cosmic history, though the security team notes that at least our documents will finally be stored securely, somewhere nobody can actually reach them. Today, we explore how America once tried to solve a communication crisis by gift-wrapping Earth in 480 million copper needles, a plan so audacious it makes our filing cabinet orbital initiative look like a model of restraint and fiscal responsibility. This is the story of Project Westford, the day the United States decided that if nature's ionosphere could be destroyed by nuclear weapons, they'd simply build a better one out of precisely cut copper wire and mothball technology. Because nothing says backup communication system quite like turning the entire planet into a giant radio antenna using materials you'd typically use to protect your winter sweaters. Gather round the quantum storage requisition department, my bureaucratically bewildered file managers, for a tale that would make even Marie Kondo question the joy-sparking potential of orbital organization. In the fluorescent-lit realm of quantum improbability solutions, specifically in the document storage and retrieval division, which existed in a superposition of critically understaffed and hilariously overstocked with furniture, Cabinetta Filesworth was having what could charitably be called an administrative storage crisis. It had started, as these things often do, with a passive-aggressive email from the square-haired boss. Subject: urgent. Filing cabinet situation requires innovative solution. Cabinetta. Our office space utilization metrics indicate we have 42,000 filing cabinets containing documents that haven't been accessed since the Mesozoic era. These metallic monuments to analog data storage are creating what facilities calls navigational hazards. I need a solution that's both revolutionary and cost-effective. Think outside the filing cabinet, boss. Cabinetta stared at the vast metallic forest surrounding her desk. Filing cabinets stretched from floor to ceiling, labeled with designations like Interdimensional Expense Reports Q3 to Q47 and Quantum HR Violations, Confidential. Most hadn't been opened since 2003, but corporate policy prohibited disposing of any documents that might theoretically be needed across any possible timeline. That's when inspiration struck. What if we don't get rid of the filing cabinets? We just put them somewhere else. Somewhere with unlimited storage space and no real estate costs. The plan was breathtaking in its audacity. Deploy all 42,000 filing cabinets into perfect orbital formation around Earth, creating the world's first literal cloud storage system. The square-haired boss loved it immediately. We'll be pioneers in orbital document management, QIS, where your files actually live in the cloud. Enter Samvit Gupta, summer intern from MIT Interdimensional Engineering. Brilliant, enthusiastic, and dangerously unfamiliar with QIS corporate logic. "Excuse me," Samvit said during a deployment planning meeting, "but I've been running calculations and deploying 42,000 filing cabinets would require $847 billion in launch costs and probably violate several space treaties that haven't been written yet. But more importantly," he continued excitedly, "while solving the orbital mechanics problem, I accidentally discovered something incredible. If we quantum compress document data using a modified Heisenberg uncertainty principle, we can store infinite documents in a space smaller than a paperclip." The square-haired boss's geometrically perfect eyebrows formed right angles of confusion. "You mean we don't need the filing cabinets at all?" "Exactly. Pure, efficient, mathematically elegant data storage." The first filing cabinet test launched anyway. The boss muttered, "We've already ordered the quantum catapult rental." Result? Catastrophic disassembly. Metallic debris raining on the parking lot for 17 minutes. The second test achieved partial success. 42% of cabinets reached orbit, where they immediately clustered into useless metallic clumps, interfering with satellite communications. But Samvit's quantum compression breakthrough revolutionized the industry. QIS patented Heisenberg document storage. Their stock price increased 847%, and Samvit was asked to join the board of directors and create the new Department of Accidental Revolutionary Innovations. The orbital filing cabinets still remain in space today. The most embarrassing space junk ever created by a single corporation's storage crisis. But Cabinetta considers it a success. The cabinets are technically in the cloud, no longer taking up office space, and accessing them would require a multi-billion-dollar space mission, perfectly capturing corporate document management in the quantum age. And that brings us to the fascinating science behind atmospheric radio reflection and electromagnetic wave propagation. Unlike most corporate backup plans, Project Westford actually involved understanding physics, which should have been everyone's first warning sign. You see, high above our heads, floating somewhere between definitely not ground level and not quite space yet, lies one of nature's most elegant communication solutions, the ionosphere. This delightful layer of electrically charged particles, stretching from about 60 to 400 kilometers above Earth, acts like a cosmic mirror for certain radio frequencies. When you broadcast a radio signal into the ionosphere at just the right angle, it bounces back down to Earth hundreds or even thousands of kilometers away, essentially allowing you to skip radio waves across the planet like stones across a pond, if stones were electromagnetic radiation and ponds were layers of ionized gas suspended in the void. It's a remarkably sophisticated system that works flawlessly without requiring any maintenance, software updates, or interdimensional filing cabinets. Radio operators have been using this natural phenomenon for decades to communicate across vast distances, blissfully unaware that they're essentially using the atmosphere as the world's largest communications infrastructure. But here's where things get terrifying from a Cold War perspective. Nuclear weapons can completely destroy the ionosphere over entire continents. High-altitude nuclear explosions create electromagnetic pulses that strip electrons from atmospheric particles, essentially erasing nature's radio mirror and leaving massive communication blackouts that can last for hours or even days. It's like someone taking a giant electromagnetic eraser to the sky and wiping out your ability to call anyone beyond line of sight. The Americans discovered this delightful vulnerability during their own nuclear testing in 1958, when they accidentally demonstrated exactly how enemies could blind their communications with a single well-placed nuclear burst. Military planners watched in horror as their own weapons created 9-hour communication blackouts, proving that their entire global communication system could be eliminated faster than you can say mutually assured destruction. When we return from this brief quantum coffee break, we'll explore how America's response to this terrifying revelation involved the most audacious engineering project in communication history, replacing nature's ionosphere with 480 million precisely cut copper needles, deployed using technology that would make our orbital filing cabinet initiative look like a masterpiece of restrained engineering. We'll discover why the solution to atmospheric vulnerability was apparently to redecorate Earth with cosmic haberdashery, and how the most successful communication failure in history accidentally created the foundation of modern space law. Welcome back, my electromagnetically scattered associates. While you were away, our automated response system attempted to calculate the exact probability of successfully deploying 480 million precisely cut copper needles using 1960s space technology. The system immediately filed a formal complaint with the Department of Mathematical Impossibilities, citing acute algorithmic trauma and existential dread about human engineering optimism. The horrifying revelation I mentioned before the break didn't come from some theoretical physics paper or enemy intelligence. It came from America's own nuclear testing program, specifically Operation Hardtack 1 in 1958. Picture this. You're the U.S. military. You've got shiny new nuclear weapons, and you decide to test them at various altitudes to see what happens. What could possibly go wrong? Well, on August 1st, 1958, the United States detonated a 3.8 megaton nuclear weapon called Teak at an altitude of 252,000 feet above Johnston Atoll in the Pacific. The goal was to study the effects of high-altitude nuclear explosions. You know, for science. What they discovered was that high-altitude nuclear detonations don't just create spectacular light shows. They create electromagnetic chaos that makes your worst IT outage look like a minor hiccup. The Teak test severed radio communications to Australia for 9 hours and Hawaii for 2 hours. Imagine being a radio operator in Sydney, chatting with someone in California, when suddenly the entire electromagnetic spectrum goes dead. No static, no interference, just silence. The nuclear explosion had literally stripped the electrons from atmospheric particles across thousands of square kilometers, erasing the ionosphere like someone had taken a cosmic delete key to the sky. But here's what made this discovery absolutely terrifying for Cold War planners. If America could accidentally black out communications across the Pacific with one bomb, what could the Soviets do on purpose? At the height of the Cold War, when nuclear war felt like it might start on any given Tuesday, America's entire global communication system depended on exactly two things: undersea cables that Soviet submarines could cut, and the natural ionosphere that Soviet nuclear weapons could destroy. This created what military strategists politely called an unacceptable vulnerability window. In plain English, if the Soviets launched a coordinated attack, they could blind American communications exactly when reliable contact with overseas forces mattered most. Picture trying to coordinate a global military response when you can't call anyone beyond line of sight. It's like trying to run a multinational corporation using only smoke signals and carrier pigeons. Enter Walter E. Morrow, Jr., a brilliant engineer at MIT's Lincoln Laboratory who looked at this communication nightmare and thought, well, if nature's ionosphere can be destroyed, we'll just build a better one. Morrow's 1958 proposal was audacious even by Cold War standards. Deploy 480 million copper dipole antennas in a polar orbit 3,650 kilometers above Earth, creating a permanent artificial atmosphere that could reflect 8 gigahertz radio signals around the globe. Now, let's talk about the engineering specifications because they're absolutely magnificent in their precision. Each copper needle had to be exactly 1.78 centimeters long, precisely half the wavelength of the 8 gigahertz transmission frequency, and thinner than human hair. This wasn't approximate. This was physics demanding mathematical perfection. Get the length wrong by even a millimeter, and your expensive space antenna becomes expensive space trash. The total payload would weigh between 19 and 28 kilograms, nearly 500 million individual objects weighing less than 30 kilograms combined. It's like trying to deploy a cloud of precisely cut copper dust that would spread evenly around the entire planet while maintaining perfect electromagnetic properties. The technical challenge was staggering. How do you package 500 million hair-thin copper wires, launch them into space, and scatter them uniformly across Earth's orbital plane using 1960s technology? MIT's solution involved embedding the needles in naphthalene, yes, the same chemical used in mothballs to protect your winter sweaters. The naphthalene would sublimate in the vacuum of space, releasing the needles like the universe's most expensive confetti. The deployment mechanism required the satellite to spin at precisely 6 to 8 revolutions per second while the naphthalene sublimated, ensuring even distribution of needles across the orbital plane. The military implications were staggering. If successful, Project Westford would create the world's first artificial ionosphere, a backup communication system that couldn't be destroyed by enemy action because it was literally distributed across hundreds of millions of individual reflecting elements. Even if the Soviets somehow destroyed half the needles, the remaining copper belt would still provide global communication coverage. The Air Force immediately classified the project and began planning to make Earth sparkle for national security purposes. They were essentially proposing to solve the ultimate communication crisis by turning the planet into a giant radio antenna using mothball technology and the most precisely manufactured space debris in history. So there was MIT Lincoln Laboratory, armed with 480 million copper needles, mothball technology, and the unwavering confidence of 1960s American engineering. What could possibly go wrong? Well, as it turns out, practically everything, and then, briefly, practically nothing. October 21st, 1961. Midas IV launches from Vandenberg Air Force Base, carrying the first Westford payload into space. Picture the scene. Engineers gathered around mission control, probably wearing those thick-rimmed glasses and narrow ties that defined early space-age fashion, watching their carefully calculated naphthalene dispenser prepare to revolutionize global communications. The dispenser was designed to spin at exactly 6 revolutions per second, while the naphthalene sublimated in the vacuum of space, releasing the needles in a perfect cloud that would spread uniformly around Earth's orbital plane. It was an elegant dance of physics, chemistry, and mechanical engineering that had been tested exhaustively on the ground. Unfortunately, as anyone who's ever tried to explain quantum mechanics to their automated response system knows, space has a peculiar way of making elegant plans look ridiculous. The naphthalene dispenser, which had performed flawlessly in every Earth-based test, simply refused to work in space. Instead of creating a shimmering belt of perfectly distributed copper needles, Midas 4 managed to produce exactly 4 pathetic clumps of tangled wire. 4 clumps. After months of preparation, millions of dollars in development costs, and 480 million precisely manufactured copper needles, the result was 4 sad metallic clusters that achieved absolutely nothing except proving that space engineering is significantly more complicated than terrestrial engineering. Those 4 clumps, by the way, are still orbiting Earth today, over 6 decades later, serving as permanent monuments to the gap between theoretical elegance and practical reality. The Harvard Crimson, with the delightful academic snark that only student newspapers can achieve, summarized the mission results with devastating precision. All the Air Force got for its money were 4 or 5 useless clumps of wire floating around the Earth. Even the student journalists could see this wasn't exactly the revolutionary communication breakthrough that had been promised. But MIT Lincoln Laboratory wasn't about to give up. They spent the next 2 years redesigning the deployment mechanism, analyzing the failure modes, and developing what they diplomatically called improved dispenser technology. The second attempt would use 5 naphthalene disks instead of 1, achieve a faster spin rate of 8 revolutions per second, and feature more sophisticated heating systems to ensure proper sublimation. May 9, 1963, Midas 6 launches with the revised Westford payload. This time, the engineering team had learned from their spectacular failure and implemented numerous improvements. The new system worked, sort of. Due to uneven heating, the naphthalene disks broke apart prematurely, but not before releasing between 70 and 190 million copper needles into orbit. That's roughly 15 to 40% of the intended payload, which in space engineering terms counts as partial success. And here's the remarkable thing. It actually worked. For several glorious weeks in 1963, Earth wore a functional copper necklace that achieved its design specifications. Communication tests between Massachusetts and California achieved 20,000 bits per second data transmission, equivalent to a dial-up modem from 1992, which seemed absolutely miraculous in 1963. Voice communications were described as intelligible, and the system demonstrated genuine transcontinental reach using 18.5-meter microwave dishes. The functioning needle belt proved that the underlying physics was sound. Radio signals bounced off the copper dipoles exactly as Walter Morrow had predicted, creating a genuine artificial ionosphere that could reflect 8 gigahertz transmissions around the globe. For a brief moment, humanity had successfully redecorated the planet for communication purposes. But this triumph was immediately overshadowed by 3 devastating problems. First, the international scientific community absolutely lost their minds over America's decision to pollute space without consultation. Fred Hoyle, one of Britain's most distinguished astronomers, called Project Westford a major intellectual crime, which is remarkably harsh language from a man who spent his career studying the peaceful formation of chemical elements in stellar cores. Second, the timing was catastrophically bad. On July 10, 1962, while MIT engineers were still fixing the needle deployment system, AT&T had launched Telstar 1, the first active communication satellite. Telstar provided superior communications without requiring planetary jewelry, massive ground installations, or international incidents. The comparison was devastating. Project Westford required 18.5-meter microwave dishes and perfect weather conditions to achieve voice-quality communication, while Telstar needed only modest ground equipment and provided multiple simultaneous high-quality channels. Third, and perhaps most ironically, the needles that successfully deployed began experiencing signal degradation within months, making the system increasingly useless, even as the space debris remained permanently in orbit. The project had achieved the remarkable feat of creating a communication system that worked briefly while creating space junk that would last for decades. MIT Lincoln Laboratory's post-project assessment was diplomatically brutal. Project Westford was an undeniable success, but it had little impact in terms of operational employment. Translation: it worked exactly as designed but was immediately obsolete. The most expensive space antenna in history had become a fascinating historical footnote before most people even knew it existed. Well, my copper-coordinated cosmic colleagues, we've reached the end of another quantum communications catastrophe. Today we've learned that in the multiverse of Cold War engineering, every brilliant solution exists in a superposition of revolutionary breakthrough and historically embarrassing mistake until someone launches Telstar and collapses the wave function. We've discovered that Project Westford succeeded magnificently at everything except its actual mission. It demonstrated American technological capability, created the first international space environmental movement, established consultation requirements for future space activities, and provided future generations with an inexhaustible source of cosmic comedy. The 480 million copper needles that briefly made Earth fashionable created consequences that continue shaping space policy today, proving that sometimes our greatest failures become our most important successes. The parallels to our modern space debates are almost suspiciously perfect. When British astronomers protested Westford's copper needles interfering with radio telescopes in 1963, they established arguments that sound remarkably familiar to today's protests against SpaceX's Starlink constellation. The concerns about space pollution, astronomical interference, and lack of international consultation haven't changed. Only the scale has evolved from 480 million passive reflectors in one orbital belt to 42,000 active satellites across multiple orbital planes. Want to explore more quantum corporate chaos and historical engineering adventures? Visit us at multiverseemployeehandbook.com, where you'll find fascinating science news, deep dives into electromagnetic communication theory, and our latest blog series, Project Westford, the Cold War plan to solve radio problems with 480 million space needles. And if you've enjoyed today's tale of atmospheric replacement therapy, why not share it with a fellow space policy enthusiast? Perhaps you know someone who's wondered why we can't just fix climate change by installing a giant orbital air conditioner, or whether Amazon's drone delivery service could be improved by launching the entire warehouse into space. Spread our signal like precisely tuned electromagnetic radiation, bouncing off an artificial ionosphere. This is your electromagnetically enhanced correspondent, reminding you that in the multiverse of military communications, we're all just trying to call home across the vast darkness of space. Though some of us are apparently willing to redecorate the entire planet with copper jewelry to make that happen. Remember, if you need technical support with this episode, check whether your consciousness has properly collapsed into classical reality. Some quantum effects are best left unobserved, just like those mysterious metallic objects still twinkling in Earth's orbital plane, silently reflecting radio waves that nobody's listening for anymore.
The Multiverse Employee Handbook was created by Rob Corrigan. The host, David, is a professional voice actor who has digitized his voice through 11 Labs voice cloning technology. All episode thumbnails are created with OpenAI, and music and sound effects come from Pixabay, which are generated by human artists. Everything else, the writing, jokes, research, sound editing, and coffee consumption, is 100% human-made by a human. No cats are harmed in the making of this podcast. Visit our website for more information about the Multiverse Employee Handbook.